About to hit record. Okay. So my Christy. Sorry, she's just making sure I was looking. So the project that I applied for the 2 grants for is Untitled Nature Podcast, as I think it's what it's called in arts. And so Untitled Nature Project. So Untitled Nature Project is an audio storytelling series that is focusing on one person's perspective to tell a story about how people are adapting to climate around us. So with just that line, maybe you guys can talk, like just say, what do you imagine that this is?
How people are adjusting to climate, is that what you said? Like something that we know about or know of, or
What you guys can say, like, that's what I'm saying, like, what are questions you have about it, or what are their assumptions, like, how are you imagining the stories are told, what are you imagining it sounds like?
a podcast, right? When I think of podcasts, I just think of like, is it just examples, stories of people have interviews?
Okay.
Conversations around like how like it affects each other on a personal level, like socially. You're talking about nature and how we exist at in there, and you know, all that attachments to the environment and how that affects if the environment's changing fast and we have to adapt to it.
Well, it says untitled nature, so it seems like maybe it's things that we don't know about yet, things that how things are changing and it's like unexplored territory or things growing in nature that are different now.
I guess I thought you used untitled because you didn't know people would call it.
But that's part of it, is like but there's no wrong answer, like part of this is you guys are kind of like, I don't know what to say. Because even though in my head, if you guys gave me like one long line of what you're doing, you know everything about it, but no one else does. And so like there's assumptions that I made, like you guys might think I'm hosting it, or you guys might think I have someone else hosting it, or you guys might think that it's really depressing. Or, you know, it's like you guys don't know the time, you guys don't know anything about it. So that's just kind of like an example of, like, I tell you guys what the project is, and you guys know nothing about it. So you need to get all of those things kind of across your is that good, Tracy? Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
no, I agree. I mean, I think that, you know, one of the things I said last week is we're all inside the fishbowl, right? We've spent so much time with our projects thinking about it. It's so obvious to us that we don't have the critical distance. So often, as you're saying, Rachel, like we know what it is and we're not even aware when we're not conveying clearly to someone else who isn't in the fishbowl with us.
Cool.
So
The arts part. So one of the things that I do when I prepare my grants, I have no idea how I don't know if you went over how you prepare your grants, Tracy. Would be curious, but I always have a Google document where I put all the requirements at the top of the document in like a smaller font, and I highlight things that I want to make sure that I include or things like that. And so I kind of am making sure that I'm hitting it. So I'm looking at like my document that where I wrote this grant in. And I have like the program overview for ArtSpark. And should I read that? I feel like I'm gonna be reading a lot, but I'll go for it. So the program too small.
It's okay, I'm getting it.
The program overview, which is not what you guys are looking at on the screen yet, is to provide opportunities for artists in Acadiana based on artistic excellence that reflects and represent the diversity of the region. So reflects and represents the diversity of the region is something that I called out. To provide encouragement and support to artists in the creation of new works, participation in special initiative art projects, and the expansion of existing arts programming, especially to those artists and communities with otherwise limited opportunities. So in this case, I could tell that I was like, is what I'm making a creation of one of these things that they're looking for, and are there ways that I can highlight artists with limited, that people that work communities with otherwise limited opportunities will be highlighted in here, even though I am not as much a artist with limited opportunity. To assist artists with expenses related to the creation of a new work, so that's just how I'm gonna use the money in the budget, to foster a vital and resourceful arts community which promotes diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. And all of these I have highlighted, these are all the things that I'm highlighting, the most important thing in all of these that I want to hit. To assist in the development of larger and more diverse audiences for arts activities, to increase economic opportunities for the artist applicant from the production of the work, either directly or indirectly, so that's increasing economic opportunities for me and to make sure we're included. To impact economic development in Acadiana through the creation of new works by hiring other artist service providers for their projects, so making sure that I'm bringing in other people besides myself to make money on this. To holistically support artists in their personal economic success via a business entrepreneurship and career development opportunities presented by Opportunity Machine. And then through that, I went through a whole other thing of like, what is the Opportunity Machine, what do they offer, and highlighted those things. Okay, so maybe I'll just have us go around the room and we can read my application paragraph, like this section that we're doing different people video, so it's not boring.
Except for, I can't see that stuff.
We can see that. Great, you're good first. Okay, you can do first.
Okay, what is the proposed project? Untitled Nature Project is an audio storytelling series where each episode focuses on one person's experience to tell a bigger story. First season will explore the relationship between humans and the natural world in and around Acadiana. My producer, Jillian Gottschall, and I begin to explore possible stories that we will research further. These include how one man has restored a planned development site into its natural form, the Wax Lake Delta, which is one of the only places where land is being created, not lost, the local farm using native plants in their regenerative or agriculture methods, not a word I use every day, native tribes working to restore
That's a
old cane breaks that once existed on the river banks, and how one town is looking to stop local development to combat flooding. Proving that the average Louisianian regards the land around them as more than just a sportsman's paradise, this project will inspire listeners to get outside and explore nature while advocating for the preservation of it.
Does someone else want to take a turn?
My background is in storytelling, primarily through film. While I have made short films on my own and written for publications such as Vice, I historically have shepherded other storytellers both practically and creatively in their work. After 8 years in Los Angeles, I moved home last year to develop more local artists and help them reach wider audiences. While doing so, I have also gone back to creating my own work, including my first radio series for KRVS. The Untitled Nature Project is a marriage of, I have trouble tracking.
Okay, I'll take over.
Developments in my.
Yeah, Untitled Nature Project is a marriage of those two developments in my career that I want to continue to pursue. Pushing myself creatively while focusing on hiring local talent to tell stories that can be shared with wider audiences throughout Louisiana on radio stations and the world through online distribution. Our goal is to include diverse voices in the stories and hire a diverse crew throughout the process. ArtSpark funding would allow us to develop the project and produce one episode for the series by the end of the year. Developing the project will involve researching relevant stories and characters, assembling promotional materials, and connecting with additional funding sources and support. Producing one episode will involve crafting the story, recording in the field, editing, and then mixing and mastering the piece to prepare it as a finished deliverable. While we know that episodes will focus on various parishes and around Acadiana, it is through this grant that we will determine the exact locations and get necessary permissions. We will use the materials from this grant to secure distribution and funding to create a full first season. I'm excited for the chance to engage with Opportunity Machine's resources to build the business side of my career, including discussing non-traditional funding opportunities and learning about DIY marketing and from business experts. Support from ArtSpark would enable us to launch this project and set me up for success.
Question, and it might not be appropriate timing, and so it's not, let me know. But you said earlier, like, I get all my money from grants, that's how I make my money, whatever. Well, in the ArtSpark grant, it specifically says that you can't pay yourself for it, so how do you then?
So ArtSpark is a very unique grant where we don't expect. So what Rachel is creating is like a prototype that she goes and sells. We're not expecting any kind of kickback from her sale of what she produces. So what she's going on to do is she's going to get it distributed and make money that way. So like, yeah.
So it's a combination of grants, so like the next grant I'll show you guys, I can pay myself with.
Okay.
So the money from this grant goes towards other people working on it, and then, so it's kind of just like applying and gathering money, because it's never gonna just be you or just be. You know, the money has to go in many different things to create something, so in this case, right, you're correct. Unfortunately, this money could go towards paying yourself. And it's for you as an artist, so this is like a very different grant for me to write, honestly, because of those two things. I don't, Tracie, do you want me to kind of break down why I thought through this, or do you wanna ask me questions about it? To you.
I have a question. In the last meeting, Tracie had talked about finding support from the community beforehand and getting letters of intent.
I saw her on there.
Did you do that, or have you gotten some support from filmmakers or venues in the community that would?
So I purposely am writing this grant very early on in the process. So this is like for a development stage of a project, and because of that, there's just less to know to reach out to. In a later grant, I have a letter of interest from KRBS that I include in grants now. And the people working on it, for example, this is one of the things is Jill Godshall's not on the project anymore just because of her availability of time. And so that's like an example of Jill is one of the providers of service, the artists that I include in my budget who get paid. And it's actually different people, it's totally different people who ended up getting paid with the money just because of how things play out. Things never play out. You can't predict how they're gonna play. It still is most of my money, you know, it's going to a consultant, it goes to someone recording the episode, different things, but those things end up changing. And I'm trying to, and so in terms of I mean, anyone who I included in here as a provider of service, I talked to beforehand. And so those people are included in this grant, you need to have those included. But a letter of interest is super important, like for bigger grants, it would be important to me to include as many letters of interest as I can. But it's also has to be like, it has to be relevant to the stage that I'm in. And so, you know, if your project's further along, then ideally you'll have more partners with it and things like that. And obviously, once I have like an idea of like, okay, some of these stories are definitely gonna be in it, then I can create partnerships with different nonprofits associated with those things. But this is so early on, I don't even know who those people are yet, so.
Like wildlife and fisheries, or like local places where people get information about natural environments to.
Well, so this is like, I'm basically creating a product with this. I'm creating something that I hope that can, I mean, my biggest goal is that people listen to it, but hopefully there will be ad revenue that comes in from it. So this isn't like a piece of art that I'm making that's like, I don't know, like an installation at the ACA. This is like a thing I'm creating that hopefully.
Turning it into a business.
Yeah, more or less. I mean, this is like, you know, my career is in producing and creating things like that. So for me, writing grants is a way to, it's not like, when I'm doing this, I don't want to attach anyone too early in it, because I'm still figuring out what it is. And I don't know if like, maybe they have a reason to not like a story that I put in for some reason, or just anything. So for me, I wanna like know what I'm creating before I'm bringing in other people that aren't necessarily contributing anything at that time. I have a line item in my budget for a like a science or nature consultant if that's needed. And so in that case, someone like that could come in if I end up needing someone to fact check or talk to about some certain things that are in there. But I wouldn't, that's not something that I'm looking for at this stage.
I have a question on that. If you have like a line item in your budget that you don't end up using, do you shift that money to another line item?
100%, yeah, you use all the, any, to the penny.
And you're not like, it's not,
Well,
how we were looked down.
It
upon to do that.
depends on what it is though.
Yeah.
So like, if it's an approved, if it was approved in your original application, then yeah, absolutely, like if you need more money here and less money here, then that's not a problem. If it's a major change to your application, then I would just go to your program manager and go, hey, is this an acceptable way to use that money? And they'll tell you yes or no. More likely than not, if it's like all contributing to the same end product and it's within the guidelines, it's not a problem.
Right.
But if it like completely
I just didn't know if you like need to give that money
So
back or like.
no,
so you don't want money now.
I spent like $21.10 over the grant amount so far to date on this, because that's the money I have in the bank. So I made sure, I literally just spent like 10, it was like almost the penny that amount. Because I didn't want.
Do you have something to say, Tracie?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that it raises, you're raising a point that Anna, you and I spoke about. So whenever you get a grant, you sign an agreement with the funder, which spells out sort of the terms of the grant. And often a funder will say that you can change any line item in your budget up to 10%, but anything over that, as Anna said, like a major change, they need to approve. But you always want to use all the money, because almost never are you going to get the amount of funding that you're going to need for your project. You should be so lucky to have too much money. And then technically, yes, you would give it back, but I look forward to the day where I hear of a situation where somebody was in that boat. But in addition, when you sign the agreement also often, if it's a larger sum of money, it has different benchmarks where they give you a percentage of your funding, like they don't give it to you all at once. And you have what are called deliverables, certain things that you agree to provide. So like with the National Endowment for the Arts, you have an interim report where you have to report on what you've accomplished in that like halfway through the grant period, so that they know that you're on track and that you have spent the money. You do a financial report. Some you have deliverables, like if Rachel and I were working on a film and we got funding from like a public television station, they would want to see what's called a rough cut. Like there would be different points at which they would be able to verify that we've moved, that we're working within the budget, we're on course, but that we also they want to see what we're producing. They don't want to wait till the end and discover, oh, this is totally not what they had in mind. So you'll have a set of deliverables. I sense from my conversation with Anna that with ArtSpark, it comes at the end. But for example, if you get an ArtSpark grant, you have to do something that is enriching to the community. And Rachel is here with us tonight as part of her public service aspect of her grant. And so there's a lot of flexibility in that. But the benefit of a grant, which I think we touched on last week, is that the funder is solely asking you to do what you've agreed to do. They have no ownership in your project. but they do want it to be seen, or in the case of this project Rachel's talking about, heard. Something we didn't discuss last week, which Rachel is making me aware of, is that there are grants that are specifically for development. There are fewer of those. I mean, I'm amazed that ArtSpark allows development, because most people want to know that you've already done all of that foundational work we talked about last week, and that you've identified your characters, that you have a real sense of what you're wanting to do, and that now you're saying, okay, this is the vision, I've got it all figured out, and now in order to move forward, what we need is your funding. In this case, what was interesting in hearing Rachel and everyone read that application out loud is that she was pulling back the curtain on what her thinking was by telling us some of the ideas she had for different episodes. We had a sense of, if we were funders and we put money into it, we had a strong conceptual idea of what kind of thing she might do. It wasn't completely left to our imagination. She also, what I noticed, is gave us credentials, like both strategically was telling us why she is doing this now, that it's bringing two sides of her professional life together, and it's advancing her her development as an artist to go in this direction. But at the same time, she was signaling to us that she had all this experience. So I thought there was a very strategic framing and I don't know, Rachel, was that a conscious decision?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very short grant, and it's like,
short.
that's like the main thing that you write. And so I again, like, I read through all these things and I was like, how do I hit every single one of these points in this short amount of time? So basically, like, every sentence in there, I'm making sure it's at least one, if not two, of the things I say on here in some way.
Yeah,
Right.
and as a grant administrator, like, we do want to see you trying to hit all of those points, but you don't have to hit all of them, but you do have to make an effort to hit some of them. We want to make sure that, you're absolutely on track for what the goals are of this program.
The more competitive grant is, I'll say, is that I think it is stronger. That it's like, if you have a way to hit one of these points, you should be hitting it. Like, if I didn't have a way, that's fine, but like, if you do have a way to prove that you have something they're looking for, put it in, because you don't know what they're looking at when they're considering the grants. They don't know if they're waiting, like, well, this person hit 9 and this person hit 10, and so it's like, and so I recommend, like, just if you can hit one in what you're writing. Like, do you want me to go through it more specifically, like why I wrote things, or do you think that's good, that section, Tracie?
It seems to me, I felt that was pretty thorough, but I also do what you do, Rachel. I go through the entire grant application. I highlight, like, what is the grant start and end dates. I highlight all of the, like, some, like with the NEH, National Endowment for the Humanities, they tell you what font size they want you to use. They tell you, it has to be single line, single space. So I'm like, am I going to remember that? No. And they even have the naming conventions, because you have to have all these attachments. They tell you they want you to save those documents and what names to use. So I always have, like, highlights in my document. I copy the grant. If it's like an online form, I copy it from online, and then I just paste it into a Word document, and I do all of my work in that. So yeah, I'm very similar to you in that.
Yeah. Cool. Do you guys want to look at another section maybe? Sure. I think the next is it's really, I mean, there's honestly, it's so little to this. It's my biography, and then biography of the providers of service, so the other artists that I'm paying. And honestly, the max amount I think for this is 7,500 for ArtSpark, or 5,000.
ArtSpark is 5,000, but that is changing maybe?
Oh, I'm excited.
Yeah.
So in this case, I look at 5,000. And I'm like, I'm guessing I'm not gonna get fully funded, because I know Artsburg doesn't. I don't, and I think it changes every year, but I know that generally a lot of grants here locally at least don't fully fund, they kind of break it up. And so, I had 3 providers of services. I had Jill Gottschall, who I mentioned before. I have, someone who, I said would take like stills, promotional stills. And I put that line item knowing in my head that that's something that I can easily ask if I don't need to, but it's something that they like mention that they like to see. And if I got fully funded, that could be in the budget, but then if I got funding, that's something I could easily take out of the budget, and then a consultant, and honestly, that consultant, since then, she wasn't able to do it anymore in other applications. But she was willing to stay on until I found a new consultant in my grants, but that's a conversation that I had with her. Until I could find someone else, and knowing like, and it's like I said, things in your projects are going to be changing, so keeping those things in mind. So I think artist statement maybe is actually the next helpful thing to look at.
Definitely.
So artist statement is tricky, so I think you can tell, like, I'm not used to being the artist, I'm used to writing artist statements and things like this for other people in grants. And so Tracie, I mean, I think you'll appreciate, I was like, how do I write an artist statement for this? And so what I wrote was, as a storyteller, my focus has always been on pushing boundaries on issues that are important to me. In selecting projects to work on, I look for voices that are singular in perspective and can give me an insider's look into the subject matter at hand. With the Tuba Thieves, which is mentioned in my biography, hard of hearing director Alison Daniel wanted to create a film that created a cinematic language built around how she hears. The result is an extraordinary work of art that has prompted the film industry to rethink the authorship and inclusivity of closed captions. Recently, through my work on the film Beyond the Summit, I have become especially interested in finding ways to highlight what we can do as individuals to create change around us, especially in regards to the changing climate. I am hopeful that this untitled nature project will empower listeners to reimagine the future they can create for themselves and their communities. So in this statement, I think it's in the artist statement thing, it said provide a brief artist statement, insight into your submitted work samples, describe your vision and creative process to include any relevant details on techniques utilized. So I kind of was looking at the subtext to figure out what to put in here. I was also figuring out how to still answer some of those bullet points that I hadn't answered yet and put those answers in here. And like prove, because I know like diversity and kind of like telling other or like untold stories is kind of like an important part in there of figuring out how to highlight how my work has done that in the past in this section. And again, this is the kind, I think this is like a weird artist statement because it's like it's very short and it's and I feel like a lot of times artists, you have a lot more things, and so the artist statement is more like what this means to me. But it kind of has a different purpose, I find, in the Artspark grant. So this isn't what I would traditionally think of as an artist statement, but it's what I felt like was useful in this grant as an artist statement, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's really important to like point out that artist statements and bios are very different. Bios are very fact driven about the things that you've done. And statements are more about your feelings about what you want to do.
Do you want to put my bio? Yeah. I think it's before this, wasn't it? Okay, so this is my bio. Rachel Netterveld is an independent producer based in Lafayette, Louisiana. She is an alum of the Sundance Producing Fellowship, IFP Can Producing Fellowship, Points North Fellowship, and Tribeca Film Institute's All Access Program, and a board member of the Documentary Producers Alliance. Her films have premiered at Sundance, TIFF, Tribeca, South by Southwest, and more. Current projects include an audio series for KRBS entitled 60 Years of Radio Acadiana, which will begin airing on the station in March 2023, and she was in the Acadiana Master Naturalist class of 2023. Her most recent feature, The Tuba Thieves, premiered at Sundance 2023 with upcoming screenings at MoMA and CPH Docs in Copenhagen. The film will air on PBS's Independent Lens in series in 2024. Rachel has a BA in studio art and worked at indie music and arts nonprofits before turning to storytelling to push the boundaries on issues most important to her. So I actually have a doc of all of my bios, because this bio is the bio that I made specifically, that I changed a little bit, like the Acadiana Master Naturalist thing is only in my bios for this project, that's not something I have in my bio that goes elsewhere, so. And I tailored it to being like, okay, what seems like more interesting to people here? Or that I need to spell out maybe a little bit more to people here, to adapt this to the readers of this grant specifically. So like, if you're used to doing film and you do a lot of film, there's things that you can just shorthand say to the people in film. But then if if I'm doing a film grant for like an art application, then I know I have to like spell out the film things a little more.
And I just also wanted to point out that bio was in third person, statement was in first person.
Good point. Yeah, and what I noticed in the artist statement was that you also did use your experience, Rachel, like to give confidence that you're not, you bring whatever life experience you have. And in your case, right, you have had this film that was a huge success, and that it really did change an industry's way of thinking. And so you're also signaling there or saying there that you have had impact with your work, right? So it's descriptive, but it also serves the purpose of giving a funder confidence, right? That was something we talked about last week, is how does a proposal give confidence? And that's one of the ways. And in fact, I was at that MoMA screening, and what did everyone in the audience have, Rachel, for us to? And why right?
A balloon, because it's a old accessibility thing for deaf people in the deaf spectrum to hold balloons to experience, like you feel the sound that way, and so it's a way to like additionally experience the sound.
Yeah, that was really high impact, because everybody will remember that screening as well as the film itself, but that was really a very interesting way to engage an audience around the issue of hearing loss and what that experience is like. Yeah, no, I think that's really strong. Is this, so I'm just curious to get a sense from everybody in the room, is hearing this, is this helping you take what we talked about sort of in the abstract last week and seeing how it applies, or are there still things that are feeling very like you're still trying to sort it out?
Yeah, I don't know about everything else, but like my experience with grant writing is zero. So, or even grants, period. So for me, last week was a little bit like, that was a lot of information for somebody who doesn't know anything about any of it. So a little bit seeing it broken down from like the perspective of everything.
An example.
Yeah.
But I want to bring up, I don't know if this will help anybody else, but something that you and I had talked about, it was like, so I'm trying to get the ArtSpark grant to get funding to take a manuscript of a kid's book that I've written and then bring that to life. And we talked about the use of the funds. One of the examples I brought up to you when we met was perhaps using some of the funding to print the books. And we're like, hold on, you would need to be signed with a publisher in order to deliver on that in time. And so it was nice to like, I don't know if this applies to like other people, but it's nice to just think about like, okay, I can't use the money for that, but what other things could I use the money for that would get me a step closer to doing that in the future down the line? And so like really kind of like backtracking and timeline lining in reverse, what would get me to that point that I want to be at would be hiring an illustrator, hiring an editor, making sure it's like print ready, even though I can't physically print the books with that money, because it's just not gonna happen in that time.
But so would you include that into the grant, like your end goal is to do that?
I think so,
But the grant is gonna get me to this part, and would be specific.
That's exactly what my grant does, like my grant is saying, this is like, this is getting me to this depth.
Right.
Because I didn't wanna commit, this is a small amount, in my grant world, this is a small amount.
Sure.
And
But
so I didn't
more
want to commit, yeah.
a little piece of the.
So by saying I can do this small thing in a year, then that's like, then I don't have to I don't have to report to them all the things that I'm doing.
In the future, it's you're after that, yeah.
One of the things that I'm trying to make clear with Art Spark is that yes, you have an end goal project, but there are so many projects within that project that need accomplishing before you get to that end goal. And it's just trying to communicate to us what that is and what deliverable you're gonna give us. So for Allison, who's that, she's well, I wanna do a book. But I mean, $5,000 isn't enough to do a book. So tell me what can $5,000 pay for, and what are you gonna show me for that? And so, having portfolio of all the illustrations on paper, that's a pretty good indication that the next step is looking for a distributor or publisher,
Right.
whatever that looks like.
Right, and when I came to you, I was thinking oh, if I get this grant, then I have to produce this
Yeah.
end result, and
Yeah.
that's not really the case.
Yeah, it's really I think that's an overwhelming thing, yeah.
Yeah, I see, so. All of the so say the end goal is more so geared towards including a more diverse community engagement. But so getting more specific on how that money that money you're applying for. Are you having to disperse it out, or I don't know what I'm trying to say.
Can we see the line item right now?
The budget.
The budget,
Yeah, it's a little bit
That's what you're saying, because that's what you went past it, probably go into.
I think I'm thinking of it in terms of a timeline, and I know what I want my investment to be, but now I'm identifying what are all the steps to get there. And then what are the our first initial steps, and how far can this grant get me further down the timeline?
So I'm gonna read you guys while she's doing this, the section that I said again, so it's producing Art Spark funding will allow, so this is the last section kind of in my description was telling people exactly how the money is gonna be spent and what I'm making, to be clear what I'm not making too. So I said Art Spark funding will allow us to develop the project and produce one episode for the series by the end of the year. Developing the project will involve researching relevant stories and characters, assembling promotional materials, and connecting with additional funding sources and support. Producing one episode will involve, so I'm saying these are the things that can happen, and then I'm breaking down even further. Producing one episode will involve crafting the story, recording in the field, editing, and then mixing and mastering the piece to prepare it as a finished deliverable. This is something I wouldn't include in a film grant like this, but in this case, I know that these people don't know what's involved in that, and so saying there's a lot of steps involved, and I'm gonna need money, I'm gonna need money to do these different steps. I'm kind of I'm preparing them for when they look at the budget to understand how that money is gonna have to be spent in these other ways. Well, we know, and one of the things is I think this grant, I think I included this in here, is the grant asks if you have permissions needed. And so that's why I included here, while we know that episodes will focus on various parishes in and around Acadiana, it is through this grant that we will determine the exact locations and get necessary permissions. So I'm kind of checking off all the boxes here.
And just one point that I would make is that you never want to overpromise, right? Because, what just happened? Yeah, you want to make sure that you're giving as contained a realistic sense of a project that you can deliver, because often it's not funding the whole project. And so you don't want to have to assume then that financial burden to produce the deliverable that you're then going to commit to. So trying to do, and often funders say we'll have a budget that's just for that project, not for the entirety of producing the whole, like in Rachel's case, the whole podcast series. She's not giving them a budget. She's just giving them for that discrete component that she's asking them to fund. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Not at all, let me bring up I'd like to piggyback on what the two of you were saying, you're saying how you have zero, like, concepts about grant writing, that's me. You're saying that you were an aspiring author, well, I'm an author and an illustrator of a children's book that I like self-published. I mean, I'm also an artist who used to be on the roster here at the ACA. And there's a decentralized, I mean, they call it the DAF grant. That is now anymore. I understand it, but I'm saying my name's Daphne. And for like 15, maybe 10 to 15 years, I was on that program and I was just terrified to even apply because I have no knowledge of how to, ask for grant help or write a grant or to, even to where to begin. That's what I'm saying. It is just really nice that you got this thing broken down in a way that makes sense, and is walking us like holding our hands to figure out what we need to do to be able to attain some funding.
Yes, I mean, when the Regional Arts Council really first spoke on the next trail. Which we do
Budget, where's that?
This budget is written.
You write.
You wrote this.
But this is my.
Got it, okay, that looks like what I'm looking at on, like I downloaded the guidelines on Earth Park, it looks so similar. So yeah, that's all.
This is a little bit of you to figure out how. So this will accompany your application. So yeah, I don't think this will change very much. This budget is extremely simple compared to other budgets that you will see.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I mean, this is the very first grant I wrote for this project, so I was, I have since written way more and gotten more like and one of the ones I'm going to show you guys is that after this, I applied for a significantly bigger nationally competitive grant that I did not get, but because of that, I put a ton of work into my grant application, and now I have much better grant materials than this one was.
So this project is $6,000,
The arts park application is $6,000. So the budget has.
Correct, I mean, that's portion of it, but I'm saying the offering was 5,000, but you submitted this knowing it was 1,000 over so that they could see that this portion.
Exactly,
Okay.
that I needed I need at least 5,000.
Right.
To be able
So
to.
you wouldn't want to submit like a budget that says what you need is $3,000, but
Yeah.
right, you need to.
Well, you wanna, if you only need 3,000, you should only submit for 3,000, like.
Right.
It's my budget, the budget for this is like way bigger than any of these things, so it's easier, but yeah, you wanna show them like, I need this money, and this honestly probably should have been higher to maybe. Need it, I know it was like in the higher bracket of I think numbers. Cause I always ask, anytime I get a grant, I ask if other people I know that got how much they got, so that I know like where I fell in.
Well, the max.
It might be different.
It might be different, so just,
But people are asking, people are asking for $1,000, people are asking for.
well, the minimum is also much minimum, right, amount.
Hey guys, I'm sorry, it's hard to hear. Hey guys, it's hard to hear. Tree. Sorry. It's too it's like too loud.
Yes.
Okay.
So there's usually a minimum request amount as well. So for arts spark, it's $1,000. So you don't want to ask for less than 1,000. But for Louisiana project grant, the minimum was $2,500. And it's like, because like we don't want to be administering grants for like, a little project, like, we have a big amount of money to give away, so we want to make sure that, they're significant projects. But yeah, I don't know.
I mean, I don't know, the 4,000 is because and honestly, like, I don't know if Anna tells you, I don't know if you tell me this, but like, the way I do grants, and I'm sure Tracy too, is like, you can't pay yourself in this, you can't pay yourself travel expenses in this, but I can pay Jill travel expenses. And so my plan was to pay Jill a bunch of money for us to be able to like, to pay for our gas, to pay for our meals and stuff like that. And so she was gonna, so that was like part of how I can't make money, but we can give Jill money that can go, she can spend the money on the project, I pay her. So that's like one thing that I did, and not like so like, but that's the thing to keep in mind as you're doing budgets.
Normal,
Yeah,
like with the grants that we have here, we do the same thing, like I don't even have people's hospitality, but I can pay them a fee that then they can go get themselves a hotel, you know, like, you know, it's like stuff like that, it's very like. It's, yeah, it's like federal and state grants have all of these like, stipulations that there are always some ways to make most things work.
But I would say most grants do provide artist fees because most of us who apply for grants, this isn't a hobby, it is how we earn our living. In New York, there are several grants where they specifically say that they want to pay artist fees. Now, I'm sure Rachel, and I think I said this maybe last week, we often have a line item for ourselves in the budget.
Yeah,
But then when we get the funding, we often, because it's never enough to make the project, often have to defer our salary, the money allocated to us, because the choice is that we either pay ourselves and then don't have enough money to move the project forward, or we move the project forward. So I got a very large grant for a film from the National Endowment for the Humanities. There's a line item to pay me, and the only way I can make this film is by deferring that salary. So, you know, I made that clear to NEH that that's what is happening, and they accepted that because they know that's the reality. At least in film, that is generally the reality. But most times you can have some amount of the funding. It's usually less than 25% for you and your, you know, your team, if you're working with a team.
That's definitely something that I've been working on for this one as well. I'm not sure if it'll make it through this round, but I definitely want to advocate for artists being able to at least pay themselves a full stipend for the work that they do.
Tracy, do you want me to go through the other one I did for this project, or do you want to go through yours? It's up to you.
Why don't you go through yours?
Okay.
Unless people have a preference, I'm fine either way. We can do some of the others next week, or is it, what, do people have a preference?
So either we can like see Rachel's other one and see the progression between this one that we just seen and how.
That might be a good just comparison for us.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a Louisiana project grant, so it's one that's another one that I know Beth applies for, and
Yeah, and it's something to be used for both organizations and
Individuals.
individuals, correct?
so this one is, it's still, in my opinion, kind of weird division of questions. I think it is, I'm trying to remember, but I think it is, but still it has more, so you'll see like there's a lot more writing in this one. And so you're gonna be able to imagine a lot more with this project. I'm wondering, it's kind of a lot to read.
So
Maybe
Rachel, am I correct that this is not a development grant? This is for an actual project where you have figured out what your plan, you have a game plan now.
These are all of the grants I'm still in development for this.
Okay.
I've gotten, all of my money has been development money so far.
Got it.
Because I'm doing arts grants, not film grants, you know? Okay, so this is one that I wrote, so this one I would have written during the summer. And Jill was still in the project, but I had figured a lot more out about it and figured out how to talk about it more. So I think I'll probably read the narrative section out loud, but maybe not other sections, just because it is a lot longer. Untitled Louisiana, I noticed the title, what I'm calling it is changing too, because I got feedback in the Arts Park one, people thought it was a film. And even though I said audio a lot, because my background is film, so I was like, okay, I'm gonna figure out in this one how to make it more clear that this is an audio series, not a film. So Untitled Louisiana Nature Audio Series is an audio storytelling project where each episode tells one person's story to bring perspective, nuance, and connection to a bigger environmental issue. The first season will focus on stories in South Louisiana, exploring one person's unique story to understand how they are adapting and engaging with nature. While each episode will feature a person who is participating in sustainable practices, the stories will use a wide lens and looking at their lives to create a personal, relatable story. We hope that this will make the environmental components more tangible for the listeners and therefore inspire them to take their own action and engagement with the environment. The series will be 8 30-minute episodes recorded on location when possible to feature the soundscape that surrounds the story. The primary desired distribution platform is NPR stations in South Louisiana, with the plan to expand that coverage to the Gulf Coast, as well as online podcasts and regional news outlets. Because the series is focused on people's stories, time to do proper research and development is critical to finding stories that will both engage audiences and speak to a broader audience. We also want to ensure we are honoring those whose stories we tell, especially the long traditions of Indigenous practices. We have a number of leads we are exploring to find the 8 perfect subjects that fit this criteria. These include so you can see my stories. I have more space, so I'm telling more about them. Also, my stories have developed at this point of what I'm thinking to include. A local Indigenous tribe member working to restore and reintroduce native plants related to their traditions. A couple who have adapted their way of living to the flooding in their area, including rethinking the walls of their living room. Someone who lives along the floodway of the Atchafalaya, which will eventually become the new home of the Mississippi River. A resident of the parish south of Baton Rouge demanding moratoriums on development because of 2016 flooding. And a brewer who decided to construct a marsh as a way to filter their wastewater on its way to the local river. Our core team is producers and storytellers Rachel Netterdahl and Jill Godshaw, who began developing the idea in late 2022. For this grant cycle, our goal is to develop the first season of the project and produce 1 episode of the series by the end of the year. Developing the project will involve extensive research to find relevant stories and characters, using that research to create a diverse first season of episodes, assembling promotional material, and connecting with additional funding sources and support. Producing 1 episode will involve crafting the story, recording in the field, editing, and then mixing and mastering the piece to prepare it as a finished deliverable. While we know that episodes will focus on various parishes in and around Louisiana, it is through this grant that we will determine the exact locations and get necessary permissions. We will use the research from this grant to create pitch material to secure distribution and funding for the first full season. I don't know about you, Tracy, I like to sometimes do this for my timeline this way, instead of like in a paragraph, because it's just easier.
Always like this.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
I have a question for you.
Uh-huh.
I'm sorry, I'm just assuming. Okay, at this point, would it benefit you if you had those people that you speak about that you want to get, like if you were like Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so, does that benefit you in the process? Okay.
Yeah.
And you get buy-in from those people, like,
yeah, but I don't have buy-in. See, if I knew for sure I wanted to include them, then I would include them further in here. These are all, a lot of these I know aren't gonna be in it anymore. And so I don't, and so I'm saying these are, I'm just giving you concepts that might be in it, but like some of these are not, don't work for very.
But it could
If you have them, absolutely, it like, you know, it shows that you've got commitment from people and that the story is moving.
so are you just naming those people, or are you getting letters of?
Well, no, I'm not, those people are not.
I'm not saying you are, but I'm
Yeah,
saying
yeah.
a greater you. But if you did have it, like
If I knew for sure that those people were gonna be in it, then yeah, I would include them. I would have like letters of support.
letters of
or-
support from them.
Yeah, or something that was, I think this one has like a form that they want anyone who's gonna be involved to fill out.
Okay.
So I would have had anyone telling the story fill one of those out.
Okay.
So our timeline is as follows. And timelines are, ArtSpark doesn't have like a timeline breakdown, but almost all grants are gonna have a time.
I'm gonna include one this year.
Yeah, are gonna ask for your timeline, and so Tracie agrees, like, this is like, it's a nice way to do it, that I have found. October 2023, identify the main character and complete research for the first episode, as well as begin research on the full series, continue fundraising. November 2023, record the audio required for the first episode and hire the post-production team who will finish it, continue fundraising. December 2023, I mean, you guys can read this, I think it's kind of like, it's just like laying out, and this is laying out, it's taking into consideration, I have ArtSpark, so what do I have to have done by the end of the year? I have, if this is 1 year, what am I saying I can do in 1 year? And again, I am not saying that I will, this grant, I'm not saying I'm going to deliver a full season, I'm saying I'm going to be ready to deliver a full season. Even though this does say post-production on the first 8 episodes, that's not what I was guaranteeing, what I was saying up above would be, just as a note, so.
Yeah, the final, I think, like, so what Rachel would deliver in this case would be an outline of the season, including like, summaries of each of the episodes.
Right, I mean, what I like about this grant is that you really pull back the curtain and you clearly have given it a lot of thought, and even though you have, and it's a development grant, but you're giving us a real sense of your vision, the way you're thinking. Like, I have a real clear sense of what kinds of creative ideas you have that you would put into practice, or that you would develop further if you had the funding. And then with the timeline, there are clear series of steps that show that you've thought out how you get from A to B, you know, how you put this idea into practice within the course of the grant period, and that you have specific steps that you will be taking. I think, you know, there's a lot of clarity, and I feel like after reading that, after hearing you read that, if I were a funder, I would have a real sense of what kind of a project, without having the specifics nailed down, I would have a real sense of what you're aiming to do, and that you have a real game plan that you've thought out about how you would achieve that and what it entails to make it happen. And so the combination of what is the idea one that would resonate for me as a funder, like, is it in line with what the mission of my organization is? But then also, do I have confidence that you as an artist have the wherewithal to put that project in motion and make it happen? Can you execute it if I give you the funding? And so the timeline really tells me, like, there's a real specific set of steps that you plan to follow over the course of a fixed amount of time to achieve the objectives you've outlined in your project plan. And I think that's a really, it gave me confidence that if I gave you money, you would be able to then just go out and put that plan into action. What did other people think reading that?
Yeah, I thought it sounded very clear.
Well, I mean, you have connections with people already, you know, and I think that's something that I don't have, is the connections with the people in the community that I might want to work with in the future. I haven't called anybody. So,
And Rachel doesn't like say in either of her applications who she's working with apart from Julian Bostrel.
Right.
Like, there's nothing else in there.
Yeah, I
the intention.
But I had done a lot of research up until this point. And I mean, I had talked to some of the people that I mentioned stories of, and like, I knew a lot at this point of what I might want to include or was considering would be included. And so that's why I could put those in, but again, I'm not at this point saying, I'm not even saying anyone's names in there, because I don't want those people to hear that I'm considering including them in it yet, because if I don't include them, that would be, you know, I wouldn't want someone I know to be like, oh, or anyone at all to be like, oh, I'm being included, and then I'm not gonna be included, you know? So I actually intentionally let the names out because of that. Because it's a small town.
Right, I think I mentioned oh, sorry, who did I didn't mean to cut
Oh,
someone
they
off.
were just laughing because I said it's because it's a small town, I let people speak out.
You know, with a film grant, right, I mentioned this last week with a documentary, and Rachel must be in this situation all the time, probably this happened with the tuba thieves. Since you're following an event that's happening in real time, you don't necessarily know where your story is going. So you can't say, you know, what there's going to be a cataclysmic collision between our three main characters when you're early in the project. You don't know where it's going, or you don't know necessarily how it's going to end. Is it going to have a positive resolution? Is it going to have a negative resolution? So what you do is you often say, imagine, for example, right? And then you give somebody, you're pulling back the curtain on what you're thinking. You're providing a vision that you're hoping they can imagine existing, even though you're not saying, you have to be very careful with your language not to say, this is what happens. By saying the word, in my case, imagine, you're saying this is a possibility, this is something I could imagine happening, or this is how I'm thinking about it. So Rachel mentioned different scenarios that give a sense of the kinds of people she would pursue, or the kinds of issues she's looking to explore, and then the money will allow her that time to find those people. But one thing that I would question is, like with, you had something about Indigenous communities. I know that now, particularly in the film community, one question that does come up is, what is your connection to the communities that you're covering? Are you a part of those communities? And if not, why are you the person to be doing this? And so these grants, it sounds like those aren't questions, but that now has become something in a lot of grant applications. And I can give an example of a first-time filmmaker. I teach filmmaking here in New York, and I had a student in a class, an African-American woman who had worked in corrections in the prison system here in New York, but she also was the mother of a 13-year-old son. And so she was making a film called The Talk. And, you know, in the white community, generally the talk is is a euphemism for a talk parents have with their teenagers about sex. But often in the Black communities, tragically, the talk is between parents and a Black son, teenage son, about what to do if you have an encounter with the police. And this woman, because she worked in the correction system within the police, universe, she knew it from the inside, but she also was the mother of a teenager, a Black son who she felt was vulnerable. And so she was, even though she was a first-time filmmaker, her life experience made her the perfect person to tell this story. Like, I, with all my experience, would never be the right person. And so sometimes you bring to, like Rachel is a naturalist who happens to be also, an artist. So she brings specific set of skills and life experience that make her the right person to bring these two together. And so with this filmmaker, she was the only person I knew who had the life experience. And, as a Black woman in this society and the parent of a teenage son, she was the perfect person to be making this story. And so that was something, when we were working on her grant applications, we emphasized how she had a unique perspective that was going to make her the perfect person. So sometimes I think first-time filmmakers or artists are worried, you've never done this before, but then think about, what is the community you're in? What are the strengths you bring? When I did my first film, Sam Pollard, who was Spike Lee's editor, agreed to edit my film. Nobody in the film world knew my name, but the fact that Sam, who now is a towering figure in documentary, had agreed to edit my film, his being willing to be part of my team gave me legitimacy, right? His willingness to work on a project by a first-time filmmaker made them feel confident that I had surrounded myself with a strong team. So there are lots of ways to work around if you are a first-time applicant or a first-time artist, to think about what strengths do you bring and how can you, sort of strategically weave that into the fabric of your project.
I'll say as context maybe is, I think in the naturalist world, this stuff I pulled from an environmental application, and I think it's a little different and I don't honestly remember because it's been a while since I wrote this and I've rewritten the material since, but I know that like it's important to acknowledge Indigenous people's role in natural history. And so I think, and that's why it's in here, is because a lot of times it's like, oh, white people have these ideas of how to say the earth, and it's like actually there's like a long history of being stewards of the earth. And I think in this application, I know in other ones, I include an example of a podcast where I told a story about incarcerated people as a way of like demonstrating like this is how I would handle telling another person's story in this way, to say like this is an example of like this isn't my experience, but I was like given the opportunity and the privilege to like I had an opportunity privilege to include this and I wanted to, and this is how I highlighted it. So I think I used that as an example in my work samples also, so you could like see how I actually handle those things.
You said you did not get funding from this one?
No, I did on this one.
You did this proposal, okay, well, on proposals that you don't get funding, do you get feedback from them?
You can always ask for feedback. I would always ask for feedback. Maybe not give it to you, but always ask.
We do.
Okay.
ACA always gives feedback, so I recommend that everybody takes this up on an opportunity. The LPG one, which is the one that Rachel was talking about, you can actually sit in and listen to the panelists for that one. You can real time listen to what they have to say about it. But if you can't make it, then I take notes, and I definitely should notes.
I even ask feedback on ones I get sometimes. Like on my art spark one, I asked Anna for feedback because it was my first time writing, doing something as an artist, and my first time writing for this project and stuff. And so I was just curious. So I asked for feedback on that.
I think, like, even if you do get it, I do still think that there's like, room to know what it was. I don't know, there's always some feedback that is useful for the next thing.
That's how I knew that people were thinking my project was film, not audio, is because of the feedback.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's invaluable. So we have another about 10 minutes for this session. So do people have more questions, either for Rachel or just about based on the first two sessions? Or should we look at in our last 15 minutes, like another, I can show you a distribution section from an organization, because I remember last week some people were here looking to apply for grants for organizations. Do people have more questions?
I do, I wrote some down.
Please.
Okay, we're fine on questions here.
Okay. So I know, like, not for ArtSpark, but like just thinking ahead to maybe wanting to apply for different grants in the future. How does it work with like you were saying, Jillian was on your grant, so she was a part of the project, but you were paying her. Is it smarter to just hire someone to write the grant for you? And is that something that people put into the grant funding?
I was actually gonna ask that same question, can you pay somebody who writes it all?
Yeah. No, that
Absolutely, you can put in a line item for grant writing. And I think with Louisiana project grant, there's a limit on how much that can be. And but I don't know, like, there's no rules against it, but,
I mean, I feel like that one is so straightforward and it is pretty simple
Yeah.
that like I can handle that, but like. I've looked at other-
We use the grant writer for ACA grants,
And
like,
and you put those
them-
in the grant?
we put the fee, oh, well, no, the fee doesn't really come out of the grant, we have to pay them, like, you know, their
But you
contract.
could say paying consultants.
I've heard it's unethical to pay a grant writer out of grant.
Out of the grant,
Okay.
okay, that's what.
That seems to be like any grant, like organization, like, there's one, I think it's called GPA or something like that.
I mean,
Any of those say it's not.
it's not that you know whether you're getting the grant for month to month and months, so we pay our grant writers just. They get paid as an hourly rate, you know.
Tracy, do you have opinions about that?
Yeah, I mean, almost every grant I've ever applied for has like, you know, absolutely, they will pay for no fundraising costs whatsoever, which seems to me completely unreasonable. Because it's, as you'll learn as you're doing this, as Rachel knows firsthand, I mean, it's a huge investment of time and effort, but that it's for that reason. I mean, I've never heard, to be honest, I've never heard of a grant that allows you to have a cost for a grant writer. And I don't think I think it's great that ArtSpark does allow that.
Oh,
But
LPG does, I don't know the,
Oh.
you know, how favorably it is looked on, stock.
Sorry, I got that wrong, but that's why I find, and from what Rachel is saying, like the process itself as the artist, like to me, this is the first step in my creative process because it is where I'm working out my vision. I'm really using the writing process, the iterativeness of it to really clarify, okay, what are my intentions? What is my vision? How am I going to realize this? Who are the characters, or what are if it's site specific, is it going to be in a community park, or is it going to be out on a highway? Is it going to be in a river? Like there are so many questions that go into making art that I use this process to really work through my vision so that, as Rachel said right at the beginning, like when she described the untitled project and then people thought it was a film, like for her, it was clear as day. Obviously it's audio, but it's only in like working it through, sharing your proposal with other people and making sure that your intentions, what you think you're conveying, is coming through to people. I always have my team read my grants to tell me what areas where there's confusion, where I'm being vague. Like often I'll read a film proposal and the filmmaker will say, you know, this will be a cinematic tour de force, but not give me any specifics as to what will make it a cinematic tour de force. You know, just because you using lots of hyperbole and, you know, oh, it'll be visually sumptuous and it'll be this and that without telling me, you know, is it going to use interviews? Is it going to use natural sound, right? Rachel talked about recording in the environment. So I had a sense that she's thinking about how she's using sound. It's like the more specific you are, the more people have confidence, but also they can see your vision. And so I find that this process for me is really where I like spend the time developing the project. And like I gather from Rachel, like from one grant to the next, you could see your own evolution, right?
Yeah, and even reading this one now, I'm like, oh, my last grant, like my current grant language is even way better than this. So, yeah.
Right, and do you find, Rachel, because I find that the more, right, I only see my progress often by my grants, by looking at old grants and seeing how far I've come, but also that it then helps me have language when I'm talking about my projects, right? Because I find the words that actually convey what my intentions are, that feel right.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, in Art Spark, I still didn't know how to talk about it after that grant. It wasn't until kind of like these versions, and now my last grant, which was like another bigger grant that I wrote, like that one, after that one, I was like, okay, now I know how to talk about this, but I still wasn't sure. I didn't have like the confidence maybe, but also like didn't really know enough about what I was making yet.
So, yeah, share about the. Yeah, so, I mean, on top of LPG, so Art Spark was the starting point, the Louisiana project grant grew a bit bigger, and then recently it was announced South Arts, which is the Southern Regions. Funding body is also providing a grant towards this project,
Which is also development, so.
like, you know, there's like, if there's like a clear. Progression in the applications, the funding amounts and the project as well.
And that's also part of the creative process to develop the whole idea itself.
I mean, grants are work, but it is, I mean, it does like, anytime I think at this point, I'm like close enough to. What will probably be the final grant language for this project, because like at some point, you'll probably agree, is like, you kind of were like, okay, this is like, I feel good about this language. And then you kind of rework it for different grants, but you have to keep updating it, you can't use the same language every time, you have to say what's new.
Yeah, and also like developing a media project compared to a visual arts project is probably gonna be different and have a different stages, you know, so you have to like bring out of this what you can, like if you're doing a visual art project, if you're doing, you know, a painting or something like that, the development process isn't maybe as intense as what developing your ideas for a visual art project is. So you just have to figure out, you know, how those things all differ.
And we can see past awards, like on the website or whatever, past Art Spark.
Not mine, but I have binders that you can look at, yes, and they will be available.
Which is unheard of, like, you guys should, if you're applying for Art Spark, you should come during her hours to look at those binders, because I've never known anyone to ever do that.
Binders of past. So, like looking at.
Full and full. So you can really like take, you know, a good application and compare it to something that didn't get funded and make. I'm not saying that, you know, all unfunded ones are not good, but it's just like you can see why maybe one was funded over another.
Looks like not even know what you could be asking.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, I can't encourage you enough to read as many grants as applications, because you really start to see, when you see them lined up side by side, you really see what ones stand out, which ones show that somebody's really thought through every detail and really has a clear, strong vision. And you read them and you say like, oh yes, this is going to happen, or this, I can imagine this, you know, this sounds great. And you learn, like, I'm always learning from other people's grants. I'm always stealing people's ideas of like how they frame things or how they feature certain bits of information. You know, they insert it strategically. So I think it's really helpful, and it's rare that you have access to successful applications. So it's a real, you know, there are lots of, you have, I from what I'm hearing from you, and I'm sitting here in New York, like I'm feeling like, okay, I need to move to Louisiana because these grants are much more accessible. There's much more support. There's much more, like, everybody's pulling for you to be successful. And that's a wonderful opportunity that you have. I certainly wish I had that here in New York. We're all just like dog eat dog, and you know, who's everybody, every other person in New York is an artist. So, you know, it's a very different scenario here. But I thought, Daphne, did you have a question? I thought maybe I saw you have a question. No, you're okay. Okay, just want to make sure we didn't cut you off. So we're 2 minutes out. Any final questions? Anything like anything final points anyone wants to make? No, everybody,
Well, and so one thing that we should probably quickly
Oh,
discuss is that
thank you.
Tracie.
thank you.
Next
Yes,
week we have a slight conflict, so we have a couple of options. And we wanna get like group consensus on this, so.
Yes.
Tracie is heading to a Broadway show, so. And we can either start the session 30 minutes early on Wednesday as planned, but just 30 minutes earlier. Or if arriving at 5 o'clock Central Time is more difficult for everybody, what we can do is do it the day after, so on the Thursday instead of the Wednesday. So I just wanted to get everybody's thoughts on this before.
yeah, my apologies. Yeah, the problem was that I got the time wrong because you're an hour earlier than me. And so I thought I had it perfectly calibrated. And so last week at 5:30 my time, I was frantically emailing Anna saying, hey, where is everybody? I can't get into the Zoom, when I discovered that you guys are on Central Time and I'm on East Coast time. And so that my perfect planning fell apart at that moment. So I apologize profusely.
Fine with either.
I have a thing on Thursday, I prefer the 5 o'clock if that's okay.
I can't do either.
Okay, so we'll go with the 5, which also means that we have to finish at 6:30. Like there's a 5 cutoff so that Tracie doesn't miss the start of the show.
Thank you. Yes. A 17-year-old who would never forgive me.
Which show is it?
We're seeing Sweeney Todd with Josh Groban. Yeah, so I've had tickets for months, but I did think I had it down to the minute perfect. I could jump on the subway, but so thank you everybody for your flexibility. So we'll start next week at 5 your time, 6 my time. And yeah, I look forward to seeing everyone. And Rachel, thank you so much for your generosity. Yeah. Cheers for Rachel. Yeah. You're so nice. So
Thanks, Tracie. We'll talk to you next week.
have a good week, everyone. Bye for now.